Hey, church, welcome back to More Than That. This was a really like cool sermon where we were able to have a guest speaker. We don't always get to have a guest speaker on a big holiday like Palm Sunday. So it was really cool to have Ajay Thomas with us on on Sunday. And what was interesting was that he didn't even touch on the Palm Sunday passage, which was interesting. Unfortunately, we don't have Ajay here with us. He had to go back down to Philly to um, be with his family and continue pastoring his church down there and do the church planting things there. Trevor is going to sit in with us instead, and just we're going to talk about the sermon, talk a little bit about what we thought about it, what are some key points that really stood out to us, and how they can apply it to us here in our context, at City Church. And then we're going to kind of jump into a little bit of some Easter Holy Week type of conversation. So Trevor, remind me again what Ajay's church planting ministry is called. I don't
Oh,
want to, I don't want to butcher it. And if you don't remember, it's okay.
I think, luckily we're doing this on the computer.
You're
So,
gonna look it up real quick.
yeah, I believe it's something like the Advance Initiative is what it's called.
That's right. I knew it was
Um,
something like advance, but I didn't.
yeah,
I wanted to say like
yep,
advance impact or something, but that I
yeah,
knew that
Advance
wasn't it.
Initiative. So Ajay planted a church, let's see, in 2008, this says, in Philly, and then after being, the pastor there for a little while, he really thought that he needed to pursue a ministry that specifically reached out to South Asians.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's kind of what that is all about, is reaching South Asians for Christ. And I know I've heard him do presentations on it before, and in that he explains that one out of every four people in the world are South Asians, and yet they're
Hmm.
still um, a largely, I don't want to say unreached. I don't think it's um, quite that extreme, but they are a not, yeah, there's a lot of people that are South Asian that have not heard or accepted the
Yeah.
gospel. So,
Yeah. I think if I was gonna characterize that, I'd probably go with unchurched.
yeah, unchurched
Um,
might be better.
just
Yeah,
because
because
it kind
unreached
of
is like a very specific statistic.
hmm.
So,
Yeah, that's what
yeah.
the 1040.
Yeah, well, it's the 10, it's like less than 3% or something like that,
Hmm.
evangelical. So basically, if we say unreached, it usually means like the average person in that group doesn't know someone that could explain the gospel to them. They have like they could very easily live their whole like be born, live their whole life and die without ever having an opportunity to hear the gospel.
Hmm.
So I don't think it. I think maybe in certain parts of South Asia that probably is true.
Hmm.
Or if
Hmm.
there are South Asians in other parts of the world. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if they would be
Yeah.
officially classified as that. Anyway,
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
into the
I was
weeds a
just
little
when I was
bit,
thinking
but
of that's all right. Um, you were an overseas missionary for a year, so you have a little bit more of a hands-on expertise than I do.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I was gonna say unchurched just because like it kind of reminds me of the Northeast and the New
Mm,
England states. Like the New England states is
hmm
the most unchurched area
hmm
of the United States.
hmm
I honestly don't know why that is. I
mm.
think it's because it's cold and no one wants to go there. Um, it's
Yeah,
gorgeous until you hit the winter.
yeah,
But
it's very secularized there. And actually a lot of cults have their beginnings in the Northeast. Like
oh,
anyway, but we
yeah,
don't need to get into
interesting. Yeah,
like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and um,
yeah. I knew
other
the
groups.
yeah. Well, I knew the Jehovah's or Mormons got started in like Binghamton area. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah. So, what were some of the things from Ajay's sermon that kind of like stuck out to you in such a way that with you being uh going through the like Acts 29 and church planting and things like that,
Mm,
coming from that perspective, you and Ajay kind of share that.
yeah.
So, what were some of the things from that shared perspective kind of stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think, um, I mean, I really love the technical side of his sermon and how he really broke down the passage very well. But
Hmm.
one of the things that me and Raf talked about is that, like, this section of scripture, you could tell when he was preaching is something that is a section of scripture that means a lot to him. Like
Hmm.
he literally named his church after this chapter in the Bible. Like
Yeah.
his church's name is Seven Mile Road Church,
Hmm.
and that's based off of the fact that that Jesus, when he was walking with the disciples, he pointed this out in the sermon. They walked
Yep.
7 miles together. Um, but yeah, I think I loved, yeah, I mean, I loved all of it, but obviously Jesus meets people where they are. That's like a
Yeah.
very common phrase here at City Church. It's not quite like our mission statement or anything, and I wore the
I
shirt
was gonna say, I love how you
because
like
of
kind of
the,
puffed out your chest for
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
second.
I wore it. Yeah, and that has been, it was really cool because I don't even know that Ajay knew how often Raphael says that when he came in on
Hmm.
Sunday.
Yeah.
He didn't realize that that's almost like an ethos that we have at City Church. So that was really cool, and that's what the point was talking about. So
Hmm.
that was really cool, and being able to meet people where they are. That's what definitely drew me to City Church in a lot of ways. Is when
Hmm.
I came to the church, I did feel like I was met where I was, and also not left where I was. So
Hmm.
um, yeah, and I also loved the way he explained at the very end of the sermon how they ran back to Jerusalem, which
Mm.
I hadn't really thought of before, about running back. And he asked the question, or he was kind of like putting us in the shoes of the disciples, and he asked the question, how could we not come back and tell you? And I thought that was a very impactful question of, if Jesus really has done this, if he is real, if he is really alive, which is what we're celebrating on Sunday, how
Yeah.
could we not go out and tell people about it? And I just fit so well with Multiply and everything else, and definitely
Hmm.
gave me more of like a desire to go see people meet Jesus. So
Yeah. Yeah. It was really interesting the amount of sermon series tie-ins that he had that I don't
yeah,
think he really really knew, because I
yeah,
mean, obviously he doesn't go to church here.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and
pretty
I don't
much
know how much
since,
Raphael told him. Like he probably told him a little bit about like, oh, this is the current series we're going through, just to give him a heads up.
yeah.
But I don't know how much he told him.
Yeah, but then when I'm looking at I pulled up our sermon calendar,
Yeah,
and we hit he hit multiply
yeah.
with going and making
Oh yeah,
disciples.
absolutely. Yeah.
And then he hit on draw near as well.
Oh,
I don't know
that's
if you
true.
caught
I didn't
that,
even think about that. No.
because one of the things that really stuck out to me was the just with the nature of working in college ministry and doing apologetics, like deconstruction is a really, really big thing right now. And whenever I hear the word deconstruction, my ears perk up because I'm curious on how that person's going to use it. Whether they're
Yeah,
going to kind of do it in like a Derrida type of fashion, or like the more modern type of
yeah,
fashion where they're just like perpetually deconstructing rather than
yeah.
deconstructing
That's
to
why I prefer to
reconstruct.
not use that word. Because in my, and I understand like it doesn't always mean apostasy, but in
Hmm.
my mind, whenever somebody uses deconstruct, I immediately go to apostasy.
Yeah.
I know people like Elisa Childers would say that's probably not obviously it's not all the case because she did deconstruct, but then did
Hmm.
reconstruct. Anyway, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah, no,
but
you're good. I mean, honestly, I think that I mean that's a good point because whenever because I mean, I would say I deconstructed.
hmm
Um, and it wasn't like I just pretty much deconstructed like one little aspect of my theology,
hmm
but that was just because I was going through something difficult and I needed to just kind of go back to the drawing board and see,
hmm
where, what do I actually think about this rather
yeah,
than just like absorbing what was taught to me. Um,
hmm
so I think that's a really good and healthy way to deconstruct,
yeah,
which is pretty much what who I consider one of the first deconstructionists, like the proper use of
hmm
deconstruction,
yeah,
um, of Rene Descartes,
hmm
going back and he's like, I want to go back to the most bare foundation of me and then build from there.
hmm
Um, which is where we get the I think therefore I am statement.
hmm
Um, but yeah, it was interesting whenever Ajay was just going through the sermon and these these two disciples are just like they're walking and they're literally like deconstructing
yeah.
everything that they believed
That is
because
literally what they're doing. Yeah, I thought that was
yeah,
actually a good word to use in that
yeah,
case. Yeah.
yeah, and the um just Jesus didn't fit their what they thought the Jewish Messiah was going to look like or feel
hmm
like or do or
Yeah.
anything. So they had just had to pretty much go back to the drawing board and
Yeah.
or just be like, okay, well, see you Judaism, bye. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
then
Well, and what's
Jay,
interesting too, to add like maybe a little more context to that, is there were
mhm,
people in Jesus' day, like there had been a few people before him that people thought was the Messiah, and then
mhm,
he died. And
yeah,
so in that context, it's kind of like, well, again, this is someone else that we thought was the Messiah, but it wasn't him because he died.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
But then
Yeah,
what was
but like you're saying though, I liked the point that he made of like, oh, like as they're talking to Jesus about who Jesus is, he's probably just sitting there like, you really have no idea, do you? Like,
and
it's
I
just
mean,
really,
like, part of me is just wondering, like, he's probably just like holding back and
yeah,
like
holding back so much.
fighting back that temptation just to completely mess with him.
It's like, you guys are
um,
so stupid. Like, he probably didn't think that, but
yeah.
maybe, yeah.
But what was interesting and what Ajay was bringing up was that as they were deconstructing, not only did not only did he walk with them, but he argued with them. He drew near in a
Yeah.
way that was going to be relevant to them,
hmm
and what was going to make the most sense. So whenever he started talking in verse 15 and 16,
hmm
where he says, and while they were discussing and arguing, and then Jesus comes in and says, "What is this dispute that you're having with each other?" Like, to me, those are like kind of buzzwords. So
hmm
it's like they weren't. It wasn't a bicker. It wasn't like that married couple bicker where you're just like
Yeah.
annoyed with one another. Like they're actually
hmm
like doing this deep they're having this
Yeah.
deep discussion and trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And um
Yeah.
whenever they're having that, Jesus doesn't pull back. He
hmm
leans into it and says,
Yeah.
this is a good thing that you're discussing it.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Yeah.
here's how it
Let's
all
ground it a
works.
little more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah. And
thought
I,
that was really, really good.
yeah. And I loved Ajay's statement. I wrote it down. He said, when God asks a question, he extends an invitation.
Hmm.
And you're thinking through like Job in a similar way. Even if I don't know that Job or that God necessarily, or no, he does ask Job a question at the end, doesn't he? But just thinking like, um, when God asks us a question, he's extending us to like draw near to him to find those
Hmm.
answers, to dig into
Yeah.
his word to find those answers.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think that would be like the healthiest form of deconstruction of like,
Hmm.
okay, it seems as though my world is falling apart. Where do I find answers? And the
Yeah.
answer is to draw near to to Christ and to his word.
Yeah. Um, But I also thought it was interesting too, just thinking about because I've never looked at, I just kind of be honest, I've never seen this passage as being as apologetically heavy
Yeah, yeah,
as as like
yeah.
after until after Sunday. Like
Hmm.
it's just one of those like when God asks you a question, he's extending an invitation, not just to
Hmm.
draw near, but to have a conversation with God. To
Hmm.
because I mean, one of the big things in apologetics is that like, you know, within Christian apologetics is more of like, we're the God that we're defending. It's not that we it's not that he really needs defending because the truth is going to stand
Hmm.
firm regardless of whether or not we're there to
Yeah.
defend it. But we're just there to pretty much like help people see that truth in a light that is relevant to them.
Hmm.
Um, and that's kind
Yeah.
of where like the pastoral aspect of apologetics comes in. You're not just there to like win an argument. You're there to
Hmm.
love people. Um, and that's
Yeah.
what we see Jesus doing. He's not there to win an argument and say, "No, you're stupid. Go back to the drawing board. You,
Yeah.
you stupid people. Go back to your scriptures." Like, no, he's saying
Yeah.
that, but he's taking them through it. It's not
Yeah.
a um,
Well, it's interesting because
yeah.
Jesus does meet like what Jesus meets people where they're at. So there were times, like if you read through the Gospels, where he's talking to the scribes and he's basically like, "You guys are stupid. You need to go back to the scriptures," because that's what they needed.
Yeah.
Um, but these guys, he's like, "No, you really don't get it, do you?" And then he's the one that walks them through,
Hmm.
all of the scriptures to explain all of those things.
Yeah.
So,
And I can only imagine if Jesus were to have like walked the Pharisees and the Jewish officials through the scriptures himself, that I
mhm.
think I think the crucifixion would have happened so much sooner.
Yeah,
And like so
yeah.
I'm in discipleship with a guy that I'm discipling. We're going through John, and there's this
Hmm.
recurring theme of not my time, not my time, not my
Yeah.
time.
It's not my time yet. Yeah.
And that's what comes to mind when I'm hearing you talk is like, no, it's not my time because if I
Hmm.
were to do this,
Yeah.
I would die sooner before
Yeah.
my
Before the
appointed
appointed
time.
time. Yeah.
So if
Before the fullness of time, as
yeah,
I forget who
yeah,
says it.
I
One
I
of the
want
writers in the New
I think it's
Testament.
Paul.
I think Paul somewhere at the fullness of time, Christ died.
Yeah,
Something.
yeah. And then when you really think about, and this is plug for J. Warner Wallace's book that we have in the bookstore, Person of Interest.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, I don't. If you haven't read it, it's super easy. You could probably blow through it in a weekend. Um,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
he kind of brings the fullness of what the fullness of time actually means.
Hmm.
Because like it wasn't just like in the appointed time in the timeline that God had set out, but it was
Hmm.
also the perfect
It's like
time for like no, there's no like
for the
possibility of like
gospel to
deep
spread.
for the
Like,
gospel to
yeah.
spread, for it to be
Yeah.
believed. Like there's no
Yeah.
possibility of deep fakes. So
Yeah.
anything like
That's a good
that.
point. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
um my conspiracy theory brain has to go there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um but
No,
yeah,
that's
that's
a good point. And I think I read I think it was what's that guy's name? I think it was Justo Gonzalez, church history guy,
mhm,
kind of fleshed that out a little bit at the beginning of his he wrote a what's it called? The Story of Christianity.
yeah.
He said he kind of fleshed that out a little similarly, but he was talking more about like the trade routes and how like the world was kind of starting to open up and how like
Mhm,
you're beginning
yeah.
to see a lot more places the way that the Roman Empire was and all that. It made the gospel easier to spread at that
Mhm,
time. Um,
yeah. Yeah,
yeah, so
it's
it's almost
really
like you could almost say at the most advantageous time
mhm,
Christ died, like the time that was most advantageous in terms of like the gospel spreading to the nations and things like that.
mhm.
So
Or to quote my favorite pirate, at the most opportune moment.
at the most opportune, is that Jack
That's
Sparrow?
Jack Sparrow, yeah.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. Because you have
He's
heard
it's almost up there with Dread Pirate Roberts, but um So one of the things that I wanted to get your take on,
Hmm.
just since we've already been talking about the people that are deconstructing.
Hmm.
Um, so Ajay brought up three categories. So
Hmm.
deconstructing, doubting, and disillusioned.
Mm.
Um, so if you were to kind of, in our context at City Church,
Hmm.
um, how would you? I've already used the phrase lean in. How would you lean into someone who is disillusioned, deconstructing, or doubting?
Mm.
'Cause, I mean, we can
It's a
hit
good
people with
question.
arguments. We can hit people
Yeah,
with
yeah, yeah,
arguments, but Jesus doesn't just do that. He goes one step further and he leans into it.
yeah. Um, I mean, I think just letting people know that like it's okay to ask questions, like it's okay to struggle, because all of us have had like there's no one who is a leader at City Church that has not had doubts at some point. It
Hmm.
may not be like my story would be like I grew up in the church. I don't know that I could ever say there's a time in my life that I thought that I questioned whether God existed, but there were many times I would say, and probably will be many more times where I doubt if God is good. And so
Hmm.
that is like
Yeah.
a stronger thing that I need to really dig into. Um, and so the doubts might take different forms, but everyone at some point has doubts. And the question is, what do we do in those times? I think it's very easy. So if I'm counseling someone, my encouragement would be to stay in community, because it's very easy, I think, especially in our culture, to
Hmm.
pull back and to almost feel like you don't belong because you're having these doubts, or because you're struggling um, with disillusionment, or whatever it
Hmm.
is specifically. The temptation is to pull back, but those are the times where you do need to dig in more, because there's something about, especially on a Sunday morning, and we've talked about this before in different circumstances, but
Hmm.
when you're struggling, but you come and you sing with the saints, and as you're worshiping, you see to the right your friend that is struggling with depression, and he's there singing, and you're like, well, if he can
Yeah.
sing through that, then you know then I can sing through this. Or seeing, you know ev- yeah, there's a should I say that specifically? There's people I know in our church that deal with very difficult health issues.
Hmm.
I won't say
Hmm.
who they are specifically, but that still do whatever they can to come on Sunday morning to worship, and that still
Yeah.
trust God in the midst of that suffering. Um,
Yeah.
so there's something about that, or especially like the confession, and like confessing together, like, hey, we're all a bunch of nobodies, like we all struggle with these
Yeah.
things. We all doubt at some point, and confessing that together, I think, is really good and important for us. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question, but
Yeah. Well, that's one of the cool things about that question and why I phrased it the way I did,
yeah,
was because it is completely dependent on the pastoral style,
yeah,
of that person.
hmm,
So like for me, like I guess like thinking about your answer, it's like you are very much all about the church community.
hmm,
That is just something that I've kind of picked up after working with you for the past couple years, and then just
yeah,
knowing you for even longer. Like you're very much engaged in the church community itself, and you see
yeah,
that as one of the most important aspects of Christianity. Um,
hmm,
and then for me, I would be like, okay, well, if I know that this single person is going through something, the last thing that I want them to do is, or want them to feel, is that they're in a sea. They're in a sea of people, but still feeling alone.
mm,
So what can I do to lean into that is to be like, okay, well,
hmm,
Okay, let's go get coffee. Let's get dinner. Let's do
Hmm.
something. Let's go for a hike. Let's do
Yeah.
something, just you and I.
Going for a hike is great. That is like, anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. Both
super helpful. But
physically, mentally, and
yeah,
spiritually.
yeah,
That's
yeah. There's
wonderful.
just so many, in my mind, there's so many elements that
Yeah.
help in that circumstance.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Um, but like just taking that time to just sit with that person one on one, um, regardless of how close you are with them, like if you know that and they're willing uh to take that time with you individually, then there's going to be more of a time for relationship building, which then you
mhm,
can model that type of
yeah.
relationship that we can have with Christ, where it's not just
Hmm.
this Lord, but it's also a friend.
Yeah.
Like the hymn says, "I have a friend. What a friend we have in Jesus." The Jesus doesn't want to lord over us. He wants to come alongside us as
Hmm.
our friend. He's gonna fight. He's gonna go into battle just like Theoden did. And actually, I would even say Aragorn would be a more Jesus-like figure in that, because he was willing to. He actually divested his authority and
Mm.
became a ranger, a
Yeah.
nobody, to go and
Yeah.
fight with Gondor,
With a
and
bunch of, yeah.
with a bunch of people that didn't like him.
Yeah.
Um, So, and he continually points out all these flaws in the stuff, and that's what Jesus does, is he points out our flaws, but he's not going to point and dip. He's going to point it out and then hold
Then
your
reveal
hand
the key
and
word.
reveal it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and that cures
Yeah.
that sword, but that's how I would end up answering that, is like the doubter, the disillusioned, and the
Mhm.
deconstruction. The person going through deconstruction, they need someone to walk through it with them,
Mhm.
not just have someone point them in a direction, or not just have someone, or being in a community. They need someone to kind of come alongside of them.
Mhm.
Um, but again, all of these, each what's cool is each and every answer that, like whether it was you or Raphael or Ajay or
Yeah.
any one of
They'll
our
all be a little
elders,
different. Yeah.
they're all going to be a little different, but they're all more of like a piece to the puzzle.
Yeah.
It's not just a one size fits all,
Yeah.
um, which is, the beauty of Paul's analogy of the body, is we
Hmm.
work together in such a way that, without one, we're not a full and complete body.
Yeah. And you can even see that the way that Jesus interacts with different people throughout the gospel accounts. Like
Hmm.
he interacts very differently with, um, yeah, with like Roman guards, with scribes and Pharisees, with,
Hmm.
you know, with people who are struggling with sickness or demon. Like there's really no two instances that are the same with him,
Hmm.
and he meets people where they're at. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, but last thing before we jump into, um,
Holy Week.
some just Good Friday and Holy Week, was that Ajay pointed out that there's nothing that he hasn't seen before, that
Mm,
God hasn't seen before. And
yeah.
he goes all the way back to Genesis. And like my wife and I are going through The Good Doctor right now,
Oh yeah.
and it's such a good show. Um,
Yeah.
but
I
you
haven't
know,
seen it, but it looks good. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely worth checking out, if you have access to it. But the um, Ajay mentioned something about doing open heart surgery, or at least that's what I heard. Granted,
Hmm.
I was writing in the middle of that, and then that made me
Yeah.
perk up, so I had to like skip what I was doing and go write that down. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's what I was thinking. Like, there's a procedure in the show, in The Good Doctor, that they do called cardiac massage. So essentially, they open that person's chest up so they can actually get their hand in there and pump the blood for them.
Yeah. Hmm.
And that is exactly what my mind went to when Ajay
Hmm.
said there's nothing he hasn't seen before. He knows what to do, and that he's been doing surgery this entire time. And
Mm.
sometimes it's just Now he's going to get in, he's going to open up your chest cavity and pump that blood for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really good. I'm trying to remember what he was talking about when he said that, but I can't. So, yeah, but it was about, I think it was when he was talking about like, oh, just come to God and just like be honest with him.
Hmm.
Like don't worry about how it sounds or whatever, because I think he was referring back to the disciples and how they were saying some things that were very wrong, but at least they were coming to God and, you know,
Hmm.
coming to Jesus and talking to him about it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So let's jump into a little bit of Good Friday, because that's our next big thing, which I'm really
Hmm.
excited for. I love the Good Friday service,
Yeah.
and it
I
wasn't
think
until a couple years ago when it actually hit on how much I do like it. But
mhm.
also, it wasn't until after I did a medical investigation of the crucifixion that it really came
Yeah,
alive.
because wasn't that when didn't you speak on that at Crew or something that you did you research it before that or was that something
So
that
I
you had
reached,
already
yeah.
researched
So
for class or something?
I researched it before that. And now that I think about it, I probably should have just done my paper in Sean McDowell's resurrection course
Yeah.
on the medical side of it.
Yeah.
Um, and just like the actual like apparent death theory rather than
Hmm.
uh, I think I
Yeah.
did Jehovah's Witnesses, um, and they're a spirit body. But um, but yeah, it wasn't until, looking into the medical side of it, you know, the Passion of the Christ did a really good job of kind of visualizing
Yes, very
that type of
graphically.
horror.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so there's that aspect of it, but there's also this like really cool spiritual aspect of it and the different elements that we have at the church. But is there anything specifically for you that with Good Friday that just like why you like it so much?
Mm. Uh, why do I like it so much? It's a good question. I think it's just the reminder of what Christ went through
Mm,
and really like sitting in the fullness of that because it's really easy for us to jump to Sunday, right? Which I think isn't a bad thing to do because
hmm.
Sunday, without Sunday, everyone like Friday would have gone into, um,
Monday.
well, yes, Friday would have gone into Monday, but I just like it would have went into what's the word I'm looking for? Like nobody would have known who Jesus was if Sunday didn't
Mm-hmm.
exist, right?
Yeah.
He would have
Yep.
gone into historical obscurity. Like he would have
Yep.
just been some other random religious zealot from the first century.
That said some
Um,
cool things.
yeah, that said some cool things, and yeah. But it is interesting to think about, like, man, what were the disciples thinking on
Mm-hmm.
Friday and Saturday? Like, talk about deconstructing. Like, their
Yeah.
worlds, they have, like, that, however long it was before, 48, 50 some hours from the death of Christ to when they hear that the tomb is empty. I just can't imagine the amount of grief and depression that they're going through at that time. I'm just trying to think about that. So then we realize how important Sunday morning is. And also
Mm-hmm.
realize like the seriousness of our sins.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing like, wow, like Christ didn't have to go through this. Like he could have stayed in heaven, as um, the Son of God, like, but he chose because he loves us to come and to suffer the most gruesome death, both physically and spiritually. He didn't die spiritually, but you know what? Like going through
Mm-hmm.
suffering, I should
Yeah.
say, spiritual suffering um, that we would never be able to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Thinking about that Christ, since eternity past, had never sinned, and so he had this blissful relationship with the Father that is, um, something that we will get a taste of once we get to heaven, but we'll never be able to completely understand. and yet, so then you understand his words when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
Hmm.
And understanding that is the first moment that Christ has ever in any way felt like a any smudge in his relationship with God.
Hmm.
Um, and how like Christ on the cross, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say this might be, yeah, but that Christ
Just
on
say
the
it anyway.
cross
Well,
suffered more than anyone in hell will ever suffer.
hmm. Yeah.
Because yeah, so that's where, and that's, yeah, some people would say when it says descended into hell that that's what he experienced on the cross. He didn't actually go to hell, but I don't want to get into all that
It's
debate and everything
those
about
hell
what that
mythers.
phrase means. Yeah, those hellbenders. That's funny. But yeah,
Um,
and so yeah,
yeah.
just being able to sit in that, and what we're gonna see this year, the way that we set up the liturgy, there's gonna be a repeated refrain throughout the service of like, "Have mercy upon us." Like we're gonna be singing. It's called the Trisagion, which is
Hmm.
like an ancient hymn that just says, uh, well, I forget exactly, but it's like something like "Holy, holy God, holy immortal one." There's some other line I can't remember, but then it
Hmm.
says, "Have mercy upon us." And so throughout, as we're going to be hearing the the seven words of the cross, like the seven last things that Jesus said,
Yeah.
and as we think about those things, what's going to be continually in our minds is, "God, have mercy upon us, because Christ is going through this because of my sins, and He's bearing my sins on the cross." Um, so yeah,
Hmm.
I'm excited about it, and it's a very unique, as I was saying, like typically on a Sunday morning we close by like, we have communion at the end of our service, which is like we're dining with Christ in some way, whether that's memorially or spiritually, or have, there's different opinions on what that means, but we're literally dining with Christ. There's like a conclusion of like, yes, we have confessed our sins and we have been forgiven and we are reconciled to Christ and we are actually even sharing a meal with him in some
Hmm.
way. But Good Friday is unique is that it ends in tension. Like it ends in this like, the person that we thought was our savior is dead, and um and we don't know what's going to happen next. And
Yeah.
then we sit in that for a day, and then Sunday morning comes and it's like just like, I think Ajay did such a good job of explaining that on Sunday when he was literally like, every event in human history before like is tied to that day.
Mm.
So everything before that points to that day and everything after that points back to that day. Like the world changed as a result of the resurrection.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Um, Well, we are concluding, so we're concluding our service. I did it last year, and
mhm.
now that um, now I have to go back and like refigure some things because now I want to include the seven words on the cross in that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so that's going to be interesting to kind of see how that turns out if it does. But
yeah.
the we're concluding with I'm going to conclude with a visualization, and I did it last year, and just to kind of bring that weight because
Mhm.
it's not a happy service. It is
Yeah,
not.
no.
It's not. I mean, yes, it's one that I look forward to because um, it brings weight. But again, that's after my study of what happened. Um, but not everyone has really had that experience. So,
Mhm.
because I mean, growing up, and I'm sure you had something similar. Like, we just want to get to Easter, we want the happy stuff. But they even
Mhm.
then on the Good Friday services that I've attended, it's always been this like kind of like spiritual woo woo, um,
Mm.
like almost hyper spiritualized.
Mm.
And where it doesn't really there's no real like gravity to the situation that Jesus was actually in. And that
Yeah.
just to me or for me after I've done my study and I'm like, this is the exact opposite of what it should be.
Yeah.
It's not a hyper
Yeah.
spiritual event. It's a very physical event that Jesus went through,
Hmm.
and um, there's a lot of there's a lot of emotional ties. There's a lot of physical pain. There's a lot
Yeah.
of like I want to say metaphysical, just maybe even say spiritual again, like
Hmm.
strain. Like you can feel the
Hmm.
strain in the relationship between Jesus and the Father, and um, yeah, and like I think you're right to say that it's the first time that Jesus had experienced this type of
Hmm.
um, maybe we
Like
could even call it,
disconnect
yeah,
or
disconnect,
yeah.
brokenness, or
Yeah.
in the relationship. That doesn't mean the relationship wasn't strained before. It just never
Mm.
was. It wasn't. It was like maybe stretched a little bit because you kind of see
Mm.
that in the garden when he's praying, where he like
Oh
the
yeah.
humanity side of him, like there's with the unity that is the son and, or the divine nature and the
And the
human
human
nature,
natures,
however
yeah.
that works.
Yeah.
Not gonna like
Yeah.
claim anything, but however that works, like um, there's that strain there in the garden where he's like, please take this. I don't want to do this, but
Hmm.
I know this is the only way. So if there is no other way, that's okay with me. But that doesn't
Hmm.
mean it's not gonna suck.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah. He knows like the torn, like the, yeah. And I like that you're pointing out, like he did, like I was talking more about the spiritual suffering, but like the
hmm
physical suffering, like we can't just pass that over. Like,
hmm
and it is easy to, because typically a lot of times when you see like images of Christ on the cross, they really aren't like graphic enough.
hmm
Like he was whipped and he was beat and all these
hmm
things before he even got on the cross.
Yeah.
And the word excruciating, when we say excruciating pain,
hmm
actually comes from the same root word as crucifixion, because
hmm
crucifixion was such a painful and terrible way to die.
hmm
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean I definitely agree with like the pictures of the cross and the crucifixion.
Mhm.
Um, I mean Jesus wasn't a scrawny guy by any means,
Yeah.
but he wasn't like super scrawny, like sickly Jesus, but he also wasn't like bodybuilder Jesus either.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I've always laughed at the bodybuilder Jesus crucifixion like
Yeah.
pictures or like actual crucifixes
Hmm.
that I've seen.
Yeah.
It's just like you guys are hitting a really like
Yeah. I
small
don't know.
demographic with this visualization here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm looking forward to the to Friday.
Hmm.
Not just because, like I said, not just because it's one of my favorite services, but because it's forward looking. We're looking forward. We're looking forward to Sunday after that, and it's kind of like that already but not yet type of like we know the end of the story, but it hasn't yet come.
Yeah.
Like in terms of
Hmm.
like our little moment in time each year of we it's already happened.
Yeah.
It's something that's happened historically in the
Hmm.
past, but yet every year we have Palm Sunday and Good Friday, Silent Saturday, and then Easter, and we're like building up to this like explosion of excitement.
Yeah.
And um, I love the build up. So I think
Yeah.
that's one of the other reasons why I like it so much.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but we're coming
So in
up on an hour.
conclusion,
Yes.
if if you're in the Williamsport area and you're free Friday evening at 6 p.m., come to our Good Friday service, because I
Yeah.
think it's a great thing to think about and to ponder and to really wrestle with.
hmm
Um, yeah, and just know that as the night goes on, too, the lights are turning out, as like the
hmm
dark, like it's almost symbolizing the darkness that's like coming on to Christ throughout
Yeah.
the service. So
That
anyway,
quote unquote descent into hell. Um,
yeah, yeah.
um,
So.
yeah, so, and yes, please come to the service if you're in the Williamsport area and you're not going to one. Even if your church doesn't have one, we would love to
Hmm.
have you. Um, so, but also remember that this isn't a replacement for Ajay's sermon on Sunday or being involved in a local church, as Trevor just
Hmm.
talked about a little bit ago. Being in community is one of those things where not only are you able to you're not able to just get to see your sins, but also you're getting to stand at a level ground with other people who have also they're also going through stuff. Um, so just remember that. And you know, we'd love to see you. We'd love to meet you. If you're just listening to this and you stumble upon it, you're looking for a local podcast or whatever, please let us know, like, hey, I'm here because of this, or I'm here because of that. We want to meet you. We want to get you plugged in. And if you're not from the area, please let us know, like, hey, I'm looking for a church, or um,
Hmm.
how what can I do to what are some good churches to look for? Like, what are some good qualities of
Yeah,
churches? We want to help you with that. Because there's, finding a
we've got
church is
lots of
difficult.
connections.
We got lots of connections. We got them all
Yeah,
over the world. It's wonderful.
yeah. So we can
Um,
find a healthy church for you.
yes,
Yeah,
we will bend over backwards for you in that. Um,
yeah.
so with that, Trevor, uh, thank you for the conversation. It's always good
Hmm.
just kind of, seeing where we end up. But
Yeah.
also talking about the sermon, and Good Friday. So thank you for that, and we will see you all next week. God
All right.
bless.